what's happening, we had to add on a layer of protection above that basically was a privileged access manager. So people would go through that system through single sign-on. It would track who they were. They would then go into the application under that shared account, but you could correlate the data together and identify who was doing what. If you had an incident against that system, it's a huge challenge. You had to go back, correlate that data. The privileged access manager wasn't extremely easy to use. It wasn't frictionless, so it was very cumbersome. If we think from a security built-in perspective, as we're designing applications and solutions and technology, if we do security at the beginning, we can do better protection up front. We can have that protection in place day one. It's a lot more cost effective to do it as part of the original design. And we can incorporate things like compliance and regulation into that in an organic way. So a lot of organizations, especially in banking, you have to go through different audits to meet regulation. That can be a fire drill. You have to go to different places to get that information compiled together. If you build it into the application to just keep track of that in an organic way, then it's certainly a lot better. And people can focus on what makes the most sense, what's the most valuable for their time. Minimizing the attack surface, and then customer trust. Everyone expects now that the trust will be there from the beginning as far as customers go. So what does built-in look like in the end? It looks like having audit trails. It looks like being able to continuously integrate and deploy code, including security information, in a way that is available and has maximum uptime, self-monitoring, resilient, and incorporates different threat intelligence in an active way instead of trying to come back and make a change. So careers into cybersecurity and how we get there. There can be enormous amount of paths into cybersecurity. So let's talk about some of those. Computer science is probably one of the most ideal paths because everything in cybersecurity comes back to core pieces of how systems and code run, where vulnerabilities could be in that code, how systems talk together, and where that could potentially be exploited. So you have computer science and you have information technology, and those are kind of considered, traditional ways of getting into cybersecurity, but there are a lot of team that has a construction background. And in construction, managing a lot of different teams and working through different obstacles really adapts well to business because there are a lot of politics and different groups that you have to communicate with to keep things going. So engineering, mathematics, law enforcement, business, and whatever. There are some foundational things, though, that make sense. One, and we'll talk about these from a soft skills perspective and a hard skills perspective. So I'm going to take this jacket off. It's warmer than I thought. So, but all of these perspectives can bring their unique strengths. So from a technical skills perspective, programming, networking are huge, like understanding computer networking and how different systems talk together. But most importantly is curiosity. Curiosity on how things work, how an adversary would think about things, where the vulnerabilities could be, and being able to communicate those to a business that is probably not used to hearing technical information. So banking, for example, is a very conservative, risk-adverse industry. These people are used to dealing with things that don't change that often. And now banking is becoming more of a technology company than a banking company. Everyone in the organization needs to understand technology. Customers want a digital experience. They want to be at home in their sweats on a Sunday morning. They want access to funds or a loan as quickly as possible. If they hit a barrier that requires them to wait or to go into a branch, they're probably just going to move on to the next opportunity. So we have to have it available. We have to have it secure. Technology is changing rapidly, so the ability to continuously learn and pick up new skills is insanely important. And we'll talk more about that when we look at some statistics on the next slide. So from a competency perspective, there's the personal skills that are super important. Lifelong learner, I think, is one of the most important. On the academic side is communication, critical and analytical thinking, being able to be customer focused, be a team worker. Cybersecurity professionals in the past have suffered a lot with, we're the Department of No, you have to go through us to get where you want to go, and it has to be a collaborative environment, because at the end of the day, it's not a no, but a how. So cybersecurity, you need to be able to have fun in the cybersecurity profession. It is a high burnout profession. And so 84%, according to a study in 2021, of security professionals are burned out. What causes that burnout? Well, there are very, very highly funded adversaries, cybercrime, nation state, that are looking to be disruptive. They're looking to follow the money to see where that's at. Maybe they're looking to just take revenge on an organization that their ideals don't align with. So teams often feel that they're outgunned, they're outmanned, they don't have the resources that they need. 44% of cybersecurity professionals are significantly burned out, and they're looking to change. So why would I recommend cybersecurity profession with statistics like this? Well, I think it's a lot of fun, and every day doesn't look like the day previous. There are always new challenges, there are new threats, there are new things to accomplish. And so it really comes down to making sure that security in an organization establishes the right culture. And that culture should be, learning, growing, and having fun, and taking, almost gamifying, looking at it as a challenge of like, how do we prioritize the right things that will have the biggest impact to help secure the organization. And then that culture also has to be making sure that people understand what you're doing. So it's not the same as some departments that might deliver, a new product, a big fanfare. You're a part of making sure that that product launches successfully. Setting the right expectations with the business, and just having a mindset that if you come in and you do your best and you challenge yourself, that you're doing all that you can do to be successful. So criminal motivation, the good stuff here, just a little bit of placeholder. The main motivation for cyber attackers is financial gain. So logins that they can sell on the black market, credit card information, fraud. Fraud is a huge portion of cybercrime and is expected to affect 5% of the global GDP as money that's lost to fraud activities. And then all of the defenses and everything that we're doing, we're protecting less than 1% of that. So there is lots of opportunity to get better. Another challenge in banking is that you have probably all of the different areas of IT and technology in place at the same time. If you think of a core banking system, you're often talking about a mainframe system that is kind of the centralized system of truth, source of record for the bank. And so you have from mainframe, you have through client server, you have through web application, mobile application, up into cloud and virtualization, and then into the start of the new era, which is the AI, quantum computing. And you'll have elements of all of those in place at the same time. And all of them have their own unique cybersecurity challenges. Security was not a consideration during the mainframe time. It's a different level of trust. There wasn't an anticipation of how machines would be networked together, what the business use cases for those things would be. And now technology is accelerating faster than ever before. And so I think probably a lot of people have heard about this, but one, like just an example recently of, something that would be hard to anticipate is that essentially AI was like a ChatGPT was challenged with, here's a certain amount of money, go out and find a way to make more money. One of the ways that it wanted to do this was to use a particular site that was protected by a CAPTCHA. The AI couldn't figure out how to get past the CAPTCHA image. It went over to Fiverr. It basically hired some people that could get it past the CAPTCHA image, and then it was able to proceed. And so with those kind of breakout and problem-solving capabilities, which is what you would want to see out of an AI, but how far that can go and what that means for organizations, both on a defense and a protection side, there's a lot to see where that can happen. The other thing is that banking especially is heavily regulated, and regulation moves very slow and technology moves very fast. So you have these two worlds kind of colliding where we want to use technology to deliver that digital customer experience that we're talking about, but you also want to make sure that there are certain ethics and protection of privacy and customer data, and how to do that in a deliberate way. And so that's a big challenge today, is that regulators are already falling behind on technology. They're still arguing with how to deal with certain issues around drones, which we've had now for many years. So a lot of this new technology is just going to exacerbate the problem there. So additionally, cybersecurity, there are estimates that there are about 3.5 million on-field jobs in the cybersecurity field. And cybersecurity is as broad field as almost saying healthcare, because you have cybersecurity that can be focused on network security, can be focused on coding or web applications. You have a defensive side of cybersecurity, attacking, simulating what an adversary would do, like what would be known as red teaming or penetration testing. There's incident response and forensics. So something happens, we want to go back and we need to figure out what happened, being able to go and do that, tell the story. How did the attackers get in? What were they able to access? Have we kicked them out of the network? Have we quarantined them? The recovery piece of that, and so much more. And as these new technologies come along, there will be need for new niches in cybersecurity to combat that. So cryptography, for example, is about to go through a major overhaul with quantum computing and the combination of AI being able to destroy that much faster than ever before. So, I mean, just go back 5 years ago, you could look and see at the current computing of today, how long certain passwords based on length and complexity would stand up. And you had passwords that theoretically you could go millions of years before like a GPU could crack that by just brute force. But with AI's gone in and it's like, okay, well, I don't have to brute force every possible combination. It's going to be a combination of phrases or words and character substitution. So I'm going to make more intelligent guesses than just brute force. And so now I think 81% of passwords in use can now be cracked by an AI in less than 7 days. So a lot of the models that we built security principles on are just going through massive change. And so sorry. So let's talk a little bit more about like the vendor and partner management side of things. So banks often lack the resources to fully develop their own online banking, to develop their own mobile applications. So being able to strategically work with different partners and vendors is super important, but then that extends our risk outside of the wall. So being able to measure their security programs, understand what data that we're exchanging with them is very important and can be very difficult because you have compliance models to go off of, but to really understand how they're protecting data, what they're doing, requires quite a bit of investigation. Organizational resistance is where security and the business have differing ideas of how to proceed with something. And the best way around this is really good communication, but also and collaboration, but also a customer-focused experience. So if we're going to make this application secure and we need to deliver maybe different factors of authentication, now how can we do that in a frictionless way, and how can we do it quickly? Because the speed to market, the profitability, all these things come into play. So unfortunately, we're not always just dealing with a technical aspect of things. Data breaches and cybersecurity, this continues to be a major thing, especially with ransomware. So ransomware in 2023 we've had the most publicly disclosed incidents of ransomware that have been reported at a faster pace than ever. Large companies with good security teams are still falling to ransomware, and those attacks are evolving. And what they do is evolving as well. So for a long time, it was encryption. They'd come and encrypt your data and then hold you hostage to that and expect a payment. And maybe you'd get your data back, maybe you wouldn't. A lot of companies would figure out that if they could back up their data in a way that was not directly accessible in the same means as their network, then perhaps they could restore and not have to pay. What the different crime groups are doing now with ransomware is instead of just encrypting, they come in, they exfiltrate the data, then they encrypt it, and then they extort you publicly up 2 or 3 times. So it's not just the operational piece, you get hit with multiple perspectives. So when I first started out, things were much simpler. Hackers would come in as silently as possible. They would take the data, they'd leave. Some organizations were never even aware they'd lost that data. It was out there on the dark web, but they didn't have awareness of it. But now they're going to make sure that you feel the pain in multiple different ways. So there are different ways to prepare for that, such as segmenting the network, making sure that we have really strong authentication in different areas or attack surfaces within our organization. And then finally, the products and channels and experiences, which I think I've covered already as we've been talking, but security has to move with the business to make sure that the experience that customers want is secure from the start. Okay. That's all the prepared material, but I would love to engage, take any questions or talk through anything. Sure.
You talked about how approach for
it does. So there's definitely more upfront, but it's worth the trade-off in the general cost over the life cycle of the application. And especially if you have to go back and recode or correct vulnerabilities in code. So if you release a big vulnerability, you have to go back and issue a patch, and you have to do that kind of continuously. That's expensive. If you have to add on like additional third-party products like a privileged access manager or a web application firewall or different things to help secure that, then it ends up being more expensive that way. But yes, you could have longer development cycles, and there's more requirements to process and things like that. So there's a trade-off. Yes.
So when these team hackers are actually trying to infiltrate or use AI to enforce a password, they're not doing that live, right? To the website. They're collecting the hash.
Correct.
And they're doing it locally on like their machine for.
Yes. Yeah. So there's already been some level of infiltration to be able to crack passwords. Now, what happens a lot is you'll have a breach at somewhere. Let's just say LinkedIn. Okay, and they get an email address and a credential, and people are lazy. They reuse the credential. So I go out on Pastebin or something as an attacker. I get that data dump of hashes. I break that, and then I try to go reuse those credentials through online banking and different sites, and hopefully I'm able to get in that way. But yes, 100%. Yes.
Have you heard about the methods of people basically, instead of like hashing the password, they use session IDs? And I guess more recently, what's their total being hacked and held for ransom?
I have not. I've not heard about that. Can you say a little more?
So the session ID specifically, a lot of YouTubers, specifically the one that made it more popular is Science Detectives, and he's popular for a lot of stuff with medical colleges, see his videos or like computer building classes. So they're pretty tech savvy, but one of their marketing associates that work with them to have access to more of the main channels, because they post all their information on YouTube, their media group. They opened up a document, and it was kind of one of those documents where it's like, hey, they're running scripts, programs in the background. You don't see everything going on command prompt. But what it did was, instead of like specifically stealing information or staying there, it copied the information for a session ID, which is like, I assume before when people log in, and specifically that little ticket, and then they just kept logging in repeatedly instead of having to use the password.
Okay.
And they were able to delete a bunch of the videos, post a bunch of like scam videos on some scam crypto website, and it was like kind of like a live stream thing for Elon Musk on there, and they made like a pseudo fake crypto website to get people to try and donate crypto to scam and take money.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm with you now. So definitely, a lot of times, like your initial authentication is going to happen up front, and after that, you're not using username and password. You're kind of in this session using a session ID or cookies or something like that to maintain that. And if you can inject into that, then you can just skip the authentication. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any others?
Just more so on like the practicing and getting good at this type of stuff. How effective do you think the capture the flag type of websites are in like becoming like a cybersecurity specialist?
I think they're very good. I think they're a very good start. So like try hack me and stuff like that. I think that's really good to practice with. I think more importantly than the different like kind of exploits and techniques that you're learning is more of the analytical piece of like, how can we use just the way that technology works to try to solve a problem I think building that skill set's really, really helpful. And I think capture the flags are also just kind of fun. And I think that's a good thing. Yes.
So if you're brand new in cybersecurity, that's a good place to say to start, try it.
Okay. So to get the initial start, I think that capture the flags can be really, really useful. And there are different variations of that. So there are capture flags that focus on web applications, there are capture the flags that focus on like Linux. And all of those things will kind of build up a good building block. I think the other thing is just some of the materials that, not necessarily taking the certification, but if you look at some of the materials covered and like a security from CompTIA, or some of the pen testing aspects of like an OSCP certification. And sometimes it's going to be like, depending on what parts of cybersecurity that you're trying to do. Like, if it's application security, then you have that path. For organizations today, a lot of organizations are still using Active Directory for their authentication mechanism. Almost every organization uses Active Directory for their authentication. Active Directory can be exploited in a lot of different ways to get like domain admin credentials, and you can do enormous amount of damage with that. So in some cases, it's like learning a technology like Active Directory, how it's using Kerberos, how it's using tickets around authentication, what are different ways to exploit it. So it really depends on, because cybersecurity is so broad, like picking a place to start and going into that. But those are a couple ideas of where you could start. But capture the flags are a good idea, because as you come up on different technologies and problems, go do the research to understand like how that technology works and where the vulnerability is, et cetera. And that will send you on a bunch of different rabbit holes that you start to connect on. Sure.
You mentioned LinkedIn. Actually, years ago, remember they sent blog, you may have had your password,
Right.
read from that, so please keep that. What did you think at the time happened, and how did they solve the problem for not getting it?
Oh, not sure. I don't remember that attack like specifically. I remember that there was a breach and that there was a compromise, and I don't recall exactly what I think was the initial foothold to get in. But I can tell you one that's more recent that might be kind of applicable, and it's not always a super cool like dark room, green text on the screen type of attack. A lot of these attacks can be just kind of very boring pivots in through securities. I don't know if anyone like did a dissect on the Uber hack like pretty recently, but it's a very low tech hack. And essentially somebody went onto LinkedIn and they found someone that worked for Uber. They probably had a targeted list. And they reach out and they're like, hey, I've been contracted by IT to do this, and I just need to get your password. And so they were able to kind of socially engineer a password out of someone. They were able to determine what VPN that Uber was using. So they had the credentials and out of the VPN. They went back. Uber had set up multi-factor, very good thing. And so they're getting a prompt. And they just kept spamming the connection. So somebody's getting a push notification on their phone that they're a victim. And eventually they just want to make this stop, right? So they just hit accept. And okay, it stops. Perfect. So that person's happy, the attacker's happy. So they're in the VPN. They're in this low privilege account. And so they start attacking Active Directory. I was talking about trying to get elevated privileges in this. They don't need any malware. They don't need like elaborate code. They don't need to exploit a particular vulnerability. They're on the network as a regular user. They just need to try to figure out a way to elevate their credentials. They elevate into domain admin credential, and then they find a privileged access manager. This is like a secure password vault, all the secrets of the organization. But a domain admin can log straight into the PAM and see all of the credentials. So now they have access to their code repository. Now they have access to all their different partner websites, and they're able to, at that point, it's basically game over. They have everything, all the credentials to all the different systems, and they're able to start pulling data out. So I don't know, I don't remember like exactly how they would have gotten into LinkedIn, but once you have kind of that domain admin, you can go pull password hashes out, you can take credentials out. And as long as you're kind of slow and methodical, it can be really hard to tell the difference between normal activity and malicious activity. Because a domain admin would go into a privileged access management system, and it would do different things in there. So you have user behavior entity analytics that can help with those attacks, but like often some of the best attacks are just like make this activity look like normal behavior under someone's. Yes.
So in curriculum, do they a student that's wanting to get a specialty or degree in cybersecurity then be taking like courses like on theory and all that kind of stuff? I mean, it sounds like that's.
I don't think any of it would hurt. Like I always think though, I don't know if anyone's ever heard like I think there's a graduation speech that Steve Jobs did, and he's talking about just how the dots connect, and you don't know how those dots are going to connect down the road. Like it's amazing to me. So I started out with network operating systems and databases. And I was doing database administration for several years. And it was amazing that just in my career, how often I was able to do things for cybersecurity just around using database knowledge that I never knew how it was going to connect to cybersecurity. I think criminal activities and things like that definitely are super relative, especially for those that are responding to events, because you're responding in a way that would be very similar to how law enforcement would, from a forensics perspective, protecting evidence, the chain of custody around these things, understanding the behavior of criminals and their MOs, and being able to attribute back certain activities to certain criminal groups. So, like, yes, I think there could definitely be value there. Yes.
You said a multiple password managers safer.
So, I mean, there's some malware out there now that's attacking like 30 different browsers, password stores, but password managers are, they're a great thing from a convenience perspective, and sometimes it's a necessity. Like, for example, at our bank, and we're a community bank, we have probably the average user has 25 to 30 different things that they need to log into. So obviously for us, like single sign-on would be a high priority. Let's eliminate how many different sites that they have to keep track of. But there are certain ones that are hard to integrate with or would require like really complex kind of RPA work to be able to do. So password managers is almost a necessity there. But we know that anytime that you consolidate the keys to the kingdom, whether that's in a password manager, whether that's in a privileged access manager, that's into the cloud, and all of these things are good things. But now the desire to attack those things is higher than ever. And there are different ways to get into those things. So when you look at how, like, for example, LastPass is storing their credentials and how they do hashing and like multiple iterations and stuff, like, is a really, really solid architecture. But it's the simple things that compromise these things. Like we're talking about with the Uber hack, like a developer takes the code home, he's working, his machine gets compromised. They pivot over and, he's got a copy of the database that he's working off of. And it's like, okay, all of that security architecture defeated through, just a simple side channel attack. So it's a really good question. I would say slightly so, but
One wanted to get into like new cybersecurity field of like malware analysis or like reverse engineering. Where like that start?
So I think I'm going to tell you what I don't recommend, and then what I recommend. Like what I think one of the best things is, I think to start is finding some of the people that are kind of well known for being super proficient on that, and finding them on social media and seeing if they're offering courses or materials. There's some people that are out there that are exceptional at that like put out some free or near free materials on malware analysis that they keep up to date. SANS has amazing courses, but they're the most economically unapproachable pricing I've ever seen. But a lot of their instructors or other people will kind of on the side have some materials that are cheaper. Like Lenny Zeltzer does some reverse engineering stuff out there, and he has a free Linux distro that he has a lot of different open source reverse engineering tools out there, and he produces a lot of content on how to use those tools. And then there's also some open source distributions that have like sample malware that won't detonate and kill your network if you mess up, that you could practice on. If you I'll exchange information with you, and I can email you some of those. But that'd be what I'd recommend. Yeah.
Did you hear about how TSA's no flight list got leaked just because someone like just looked up what like doing showdown? Some Jenkins servers, so they just were looking through. They find TSA's like files of the servers, and they just go through and they're going through and like, oh, no flight list, and like bunches of like sets of flights like going and arriving at certain times, and it's so bad and so easy, like how they did it. I wrote like a little quick like HTML website, like how to own an airline in 3 minutes and stuff one on boredom.
I have not heard of this. It doesn't shock me then. Because when I look back at some of like just the largest breaches and how they occurred, and the barrier to entry and how easy it was, it's often just kind of embarrassing. Like, that's.
Do you remember any breaches that like were crazy easy? Like I technically didn't exist, but like the Yahoo breach, like way back.
Let's see, that were very easy. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the company name, but so there was a site basically that the developer was not able to debug in production. There was a separation of duties. So what the developer did was he just pushed a config file for IIS to put the web server in directory browsing mode. And then he coded so that it would write a log of all of the data verbose into the web root. And so now direct browsing is on, and he's dumping all this verbose logging data. So all someone does is just hit the site without specifying the resource. They go into the directory browsing, and there's a log dumping all of the PII for every transaction that's run through that server. And so from the attacker's perspective, right, they just type an address in the browser and you're straight in.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Yeah.
pretty easy. Anything else? Yes.
How important was the internet stakeholders for like?
I mean, from an annoyance of coming on a flash site, playing music and stuff, huge, but I'm not kidding. From a security perspective, any type of I'll answer probably simpler than you want. Any type of site that's depending on like those browser add-ins that were popular, like, like Java we still deal with today, but like you had Silverlight and Flash and stuff like that. And there were always vulnerabilities in those. For organizations to be able to keep those patched and updated was just a nightmare because there's always tons of those. But I think that that's helped, with I think HTML5, that transition helped with that kind of that dependency. But browser still, there's tons and tons of vulnerabilities. So at the end of the day, I'm not sure, but it's definitely easier to patch one thing than it was to patch all these others, especially when you ended up with dependencies. Like I have to run Flash version this for this site or it doesn't work, and I got to do Java version this or it doesn't work, and I have to do Silverlight this over here. Yeah, that was. Yes.
You've already said what the easiest reach was. What was the most like impressive, or the most clever way you've seen about bypass to do?
I think that's a really good question. One of the ones I'm thinking of that was really clever was really before cybersecurity was a thing. And let's see, what was his name? Kevin Mitnick, does that name ring a bell? So Kevin Mitnick, to my knowledge, was one of the first people to actually go to jail for cybercrimes.
I mean, does he go around like having cybersecurity?
Yeah, he does now.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, so like apparently like the best way to success is commit a crime, get out, and then sell your knowledge of committing that crime.
Yeah.
But what he did was he was attacking a Unix server, and the Unix server was set up, this is early days of security before there was a whole lot of security, but it had been configured with a remote host file, so it's only allowing one IP to come in. And he wants to basically attack that machine. So he knew that like when he would connect, if he could spoof the first part of the TCP handshake as if it was coming from that trusted source. So he knew the IP address that machine was allowing it. It wasn't his. So he would spoof, and this is early days, so he kind of had to write his own tool to manipulate the protocol stack. But he basically spoofed that address in with the first part of a TCP handshake. And just for the point of the conversation, TCP handshake is three things. So I'm going to send a send, I'm going to get back a send at, and then I'm going to acknowledge that. And then we're in a session. So what he has to do is he has to spoof the IP address, but when it responds with the SYNAC, it's going to go back to the actual machine that he spoofed. It's not coming back to him. So he has to then guess what the sequence number of the TCP packets are, and he has to make sure his packet gets back to the server before the actual server responds. So he basically is anticipating the sequence numbers of TCP, beats it back. Then the handshake completes with the, so spoof the send, and that comes back, and he comes back with the acknowledgement. Now they're in a session, but he's completely blind because any responses that come back to his packets are going to go back to the other host. And that's just impossible to keep up with sequence number guessing like that the entire time. So he has to send in enough packets to rewrite our host file to include his IP address. And he's able to do that. And then once he's done that, then he can just connect in normally. And he was on the system. So he did all kinds of things with home cards and everything in sleep.com. I just thought, like, when you think about just clever exploitation of like computer science and the way that TCP/IP works to be able to pull that attack off, like especially at that time, right? Because like no one's talking about this, no one's blogging about this. You can't go read about this anywhere. Oh, that was super fun. All right. Anything else? So the one thing that I would kind of offer up is that I think one of the important things in any profession is if you can find someone that's kind of been doing this stuff to kind of point you in resources. So if anyone's interested, I have my card here, and I'm definitely open if anyone wants to reach out and talk more or anything like that. And we're right down the street here in Hammond. So thank you all for your attention and having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and don't forget we have the conference call in about an hour and a half. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was wonderful, and
Thank you.
all right, thank you so much. Everyone, end the session, please.
Yeah.